John Derbyshire, you've published 2 books about math and written a lot about the human sciences. You've described yourself as a dyed-in-the-wool empiricist. So how does your fondness for math and science connect with your social and political views?
Well, I was trained as a mathematician and had mathematical scientific training, and it gave me a deep respect for data. I always want to go to the data. And if somebody tells me that, society is in this state or that state, I say, well, show me the data. Show me the data that tells me that. And I think that conservatism, a proper conservatism, should rest on respect for data, on respect for cold facts, and not on how we feel about those facts. You can have an opinion about something. Anybody can have an opinion. Great British journalist said, "Opinion's cheap, but facts are sacred." And I think that's right. I do believe we can discover facts about the world, including the human world, and develop good ideas about the structure of the world based on what we discover. I do believe very fundamentally in science, in scientific inquiry, in empirical inquiry, and in human reason.
How would you define being an empiricist?
An empiricist is a person who works upward from data. He works upward from the facts. He observes the world. He classifies. He measures. He compares notes with other people. That's a very important part. Science is a social activity. You can't do science on a desert island. It's a social activity. After some winnowing and maybe some false leads and some blind alleys, you come to truth. You come to truth about the world. And we've made that work very well with the physical world over the last 300 years. We have real good physics and chemistry and basic biology too. The human world presents many more difficulties, and a lot of them have been underestimated, in my opinion. But I do think that by the same methods, by careful inquiry, by careful cold inquiry, and by comparing notes, I do think we can arrive at truths about human nature. And the truths about human nature, I believe, will be conservative truths. They'll be, human nature, I think, is much more like what conservatives have always said it's like, than it is like what liberals say it's like.
Your new book is about pessimism. It's called We Are Doomed, Reclaiming Conservative Pessimism. Why would anyone want to be a conservative when, according to your book, conservatism is such a gloomy outlook?
For the aforementioned reason, that conservatism is true, that a gloomy outlook is more likely to be true than a cheery outlook. And I think there are good reasons in human nature for that. Human nature is optimistic. It needs to be. Life is mostly a rather trying business. It's mostly rather boring business, and some bits of it are really awful. So human beings need optimism to see them through that. But I think optimism can overstretch itself. It can overleap itself. And I think conservatism should be a restraining force on the natural optimism that we have. Conservatism should pull us back from optimism. Nowadays, when we talk about human nature now, we talk about it in terms of evolutionary psychology and paleoanthropology, how human beings lived for the tens of thousands of years before civilization came up. That's when the bedrock of human nature was laid down in little hunter-gatherer tribes. And life in one of those tribes, we know quite a lot about it because some of them survived into the modern age. Life is nasty, brutish, and short, as Hobbes said, and it couldn't be sustained without some cheery optimism, including a lot of reality-denying optimism. If you're organizing a hunt with the other members of the tribe, you want to take the optimistic outlook. You want to assume that you're going to bring down that wildebeest or whatever it is, because not to do so would restrain the whole enterprise and perhaps leave the tribe starving. Optimism is built into human nature, but I think modern liberalism takes it much too far and expects much too much of human beings. You see this in modern educational theory, for example, where the operating assumption is that anybody can be anything. If we just get the schools right, you know, everybody will go to college and be a doctor or an architect if we just get the schools right. That's expecting too much of people. That's expecting too much of human nature. It's too optimistic. Conservatism should restrain that kind of optimism and say, no, the world isn't that nice, and we have to accept it as it is if we want to live happy and fulfilled lives. You can't live a happy and fulfilled life just on lies. A little seasoning of lies perhaps doesn't hurt, but it needs to be kept reined in.
How do you feel about the state of education in America today?
As I just said, there's almost no aspect of modern life in America, perhaps I'm going to say in the West at large, that's more awash in unrestrained optimism than education. To hear educationists talk is to hear about a human being that I really don't recognize, a human nature that I've never encountered, a human nature full of infinite possibility, a human nature, a human being who can be anything if only he's correctly manipulated by careful, loving teachers and so on. And that human being doesn't exist. Most of the individual human personality, it seems to me, based on the data that I've seen and evaluating that data as a dyed-in-the-wool empiricist, most of individual human nature is pretty well fixed by the time you leave childhood, and nobody's going to be able to do much with it. Probably at least a half of it is fixed even by the time you're born. So that this idea of infinite malleability, the human being is infinitely transformable. If only we do this, if only we do that, if only we upend society, if only we get the schools right, if only we spend another $1 billion. That seems to me to be fundamentally false and wasteful and misleading and ultimately destructive. A friend of mine likes to say, what hurts helps and what helps hurts. You're trying to help people by these Herculean efforts at educational intervention, by seeking out these Superman teachers who are going to work miracles on the kids, by spending these great boxcar loads of money. You're trying to help, but you actually end up hurting. You see that all over. Just to take one tiny example, you get more people into college. And you can get more people into college if the teachers in the high schools push and they help the kids fill out the forms and the US government gives them loans. Yeah, you can get more people into college. Are they going to graduate? And if they don't graduate, they're then a college dropout, which is probably not as good as being, for example, an accredited electrician or carpenter, some other route they might have gone without going to college. So help hurts, and conversely hurt helps. And a lot of the kind of pejoratives that liberals throw at conservatives about how cold and hard-hearted and mean we are, well, some of that, in inverted commas, hard-heartedness and mean-spiritedness and coldness is good for you.
Would it be similar to what we call tough love?
Yeah, tough love. What helps hurts. What hurts helps.
How would you say H.L. Mencken has affected your life?
Well, he's affected me stylistically, I know, because sometimes when I read my own stuff, I see a little bit of Mencken in there. He affected me in another way, in that he got me a start in the world of writing. In the 1990s, I developed a mild fascination with our 30th president, Calvin Coolidge. I almost said your 30th president because at that time he was yours, but I've since got citizenship, so now he's ours. And I just read everything I could find about him. And one of the best things ever written about Calvin Coolidge was Mencken's obituary essay, which is in the Mencken Chrestomathy somewhere. It's just a marvelous piece, and really, although in many ways, in his what Mencken called the bourgeoisie mentality, the socially orthodox, rather conformist mentality that Mencken despised. Coolidge was a bit that way, but yet Mencken managed to be very sympathetic to him, and you feel, reading the essay, rather liked him as a president because he did so little, because he was the Jeffersonian model of a minimal chief executive. And Mencken liked that. Mencken didn't like big government, and I don't like big government either. And Coolidge was small government. Coolidge was government stripped down to the buff. It was really minimal government. He liked that. I liked that. And inspired by Mencken, amongst others, I went ahead and wrote a novel in which Calvin Coolidge has a walk-on part. And that got me a start in the world of writing. So I thank Mencken for that.
Mr. Derbyshire, what would you say to the critic who says all of this fancy-sounding description of conservatism is really just a way to mask a deep-seated racism?
I wouldn't say anything. I would get up and leave at that point. I really don't get into what is racist and what isn't racist. All this angels on heads of pins about what people's deep motivations are. I just like to look at facts. I like to look at data. I'm not interested in, is it racist? I'm interested in, is it true? You know, I grew up in England when England was monoracial. I grew up amongst people who looked just like me, and didn't really have any exposure to multiracialism until I was pretty much grown up. So I didn't get this very acute and actually very American, although it's now infected Britain too, but at that time it was a very American neurosis, this mass neurosis about race. I didn't get it, and I still don't really have it, which puts me at odds not just with liberal Americans, but even with conservative Americans. I don't want to say bad things about my adopted country, but it really is a national neurosis. And there are facts about race. I mean, races exist. Races are a matter of deep common ancestry. They're big, old, inbred population groups. They do exist. Any species as widespread as Homo sapiens is going to have regional variations. You see it in every other species. You wouldn't be surprised to see it in Homo sap. So races do exist, and there are differences. There are generalized statistical differences between races. And those are facts about the world that we can discover empirically and evaluate and maybe feed into our social policy. And to pretend that that's not so is just going to end you up with bad social policy and wrong-headed ideas. So I don't have the kind of skin-tingling emotional reaction that pretty much all Americans have, one way or the other, when the issue of race comes up. I just like to know the facts about it and how we can apply those facts in our public policy. Yeah, it really is. Although, as I said, it's metastasized now. I think you find it all over the Western world. You certainly find it in Canada and Britain, perhaps all over the Anglosphere. I think the French don't seem to be quite as susceptible to it. Yeah, it really is. It's a neurosis in the sense that it's emotional and instinctive and irrational. It doesn't actually make much sense to invest that much passion in that particular issue. as I said, the human races, as they've developed, are different. But the differences aren't actually that great. Nothing like as different as, the difference between breeds of dogs, for example. They're slight differences. They're so slight that you have to do a lot of statistical work even to uncover them. And I certainly don't think they should affect us on a person-to-person basis. But when you're dealing with public policy, you are dealing with great masses of people, and the statistics kick in. And you're going to have to take them into account. But you need to get them right. You need to have the true facts, not wish fulfillment fantasies.